and therefore truth comes to us through empiricism. And yet, science itself, that which organizes nature and gives us the methods by which we evaluate empirical data, science itself is organized by concepts and is therefore a product of idealism. So these sort of, and Levinas is thinking about materialism, not just in terms of science, but also materialism as we've discussed it in terms of Marx and Nietzsche. Right? What does materialism mean to these materialist rebels, right? The scientists? Is there a way to understand materialism that is not determinism? Would be one question to ask, right? Levinas writes, Marxism was the first doctrine in Western history to contest this view of man. Marx challenges this liberal idea. Science, morality, and aesthetics are not moral, scientific, or aesthetic in themselves, but at every moment translate the basic opposition between the bourgeois civilization and the proletarian one. Straightforward Marxism, right? We saw this in our discussion of Marx. Marxism is opposed not just to Christianity, but to the whole of idealist liberalism, wherein being does not determine consciousness, Levinas writes, but consciousness or reason determines being. Right? So, what comes first, being or consciousness? Does reason grasp being in its truth, or does being, beyond rational grasp, send consciousness on its way, blindly, as it were? So we've raised many questions that this short little essay isn't going to deal with, and we'll sort of let hang here. But Levinas is not a Marxist without further ado. And he is critical of Marxist materialism also. He says, all the same, this break with liberalism is not a definitive one. In a certain sense, Marxism consciously continues the traditions of 1789. And this is what I said about Marx in our videos also. Right? Marxism is a continuation of the French Revolution, of the liberal ideology in a certain way. And in this way, right, Marxism is equally prey to fascism. It's not just, right, obviously. Now, in the philosophical tradition, what is matter, what is materialism, and what is the body? Levinas thinks in the tradition, the body is not only something eternally foreign, right? The body is foreign. We are, in essence, minds, rationalities, thinking things. The body is that which gets in the way of our pure rationality. The body is an obstacle. Classical interpretations relegate to an inferior level and regard as a stage to be overcome a feeling of identity between our bodies and ourselves. The identity that we feel with our bodies, the idea that we are connected to our bodies, that our bodies are an important part of our identity, is something that we have to overcome according to classical interpretations of the body. So, right, in idealism, whether it's Platonic or Kantian, the body is an obstacle, is not what we are at all, and it's wrong to identify ourselves with our bodies. For Levinas, the body is something different. The body is, in fact, absolutely part of our identity, and we must identify ourselves with our bodies. Our bodies are essential to us, right? So he is endorsing a kind of materialism here, and we can certainly hear Marx and I think especially Nietzsche in the background. There's a line in Nietzsche, I think it's in The Gay Science, where he says, it's wrong to say, I have a body. One should say, I am a body. I'm paraphrasing. Levinas writes, not only is it the case that the body is closer and more familiar to us than the rest of the world and controls our psychological life, our temperament, and our activities. Beyond these banal observations, there is the feeling of identity. Do we not affirm ourselves in the unique warmth of our bodies long before any blossoming of the self that claims to be separate from the body? In other words, as children, as babies, is it not, first of all, as bodies that we come to understand the world? Right? We learn to crawl, we learn to walk, we learn to talk, we learn to eat, and all of that is a becoming acquainted with our bodies, which is beyond reason. Right? It has nothing to do with reason, Levinas seems to be implying. And this is not just in developmental stages, but is true throughout life. He goes on, is it not the case that the sick man experiences the indivisible simplicity of his being? The indivisible simplicity of his being. When he turns over in his bed of suffering to find a position that gives him peace, right? The experience of being sick is an experience of the indivisible simplicity of the being of the self, the fact that the mind and body cannot be separated, right? The suffering of the body impacts the mind, and vice versa. So the body is not only a happy or unhappy accident that relates us to the implacable world of matter. Its adherence to the self is of value in itself, Levinas writes. It is an adherence that one does not escape and no metaphor can confuse with the presence of an external object. Right? The body, the adherence of the body to the self is of value and is inescapable, and it is impossible to confuse the body with an external object, as a philosopher like Descartes does. Levinas goes on, it is a union that does not in any way alter the tragic character of finality. That quote is on 68. Right? Now, Levinas's next move in this essay is essentially to show that the way matter is conceived by idealism is the same way that matter is conceived in materialism. That, in essence, materialism has an idealistic understanding of the material world. And that this is deeply problematic. Because when materialism negates, as Levinas says, the spiritual, when Marx or Nietzsche sees materialism as negating spirit, whether spirit is understood in terms of Christian spirit, or for Nietzsche, or spirit as is understood by Hegel in the case of Marx, materialism puts itself in opposition to a kind of spiritualism. And this materialism, operating with an idealist, scientific grasp of matter, then becomes dangerous. He writes, again on 68, by negating the spirit, the modern world embraces the body. But the way it understands the body is elemental, basic, and, I'm sorry, this is not a quotation, this is me, and because opposed to liberalism, to Kant, to pure reason, to the autonomous mind, it is in opposition to civilization. By negating the spirit, the modern world embraces the body, but the way it understands the body is elemental and basic, and thus in opposition to the idealism of liberalism, the liberalism of Kant. Therefore, it is understood as in opposition to civilization. Right? Civilization understood as Kantian liberalism. The return to nudity, to virginity, this moment of pure freedom in the present, with the body understood this way, as a kind of negation of mind, this return to nature solicits an upswelling of violence. I think if we continue, it will hopefully become clearer. So I believe this is again on 68. Levinas writes, the importance attributed to this feeling for the body, with which the Western spirit has never wished to content itself, is at the basis of a new conception of man. The biological, with the notion of inevitability it entails, right, deterministic materialism, becomes more than an object of spiritual life. It becomes its heart. Right? What he's suggesting here is that spiritual life becomes